He was meant to be a beacon, a bearer of wisdom from the stars. Saruman the White, Kirumo, as he was once known, was not born in darkness. He was forged in light, crafted in the timeless thought of Eru Ilyavator, and sent by the Vala to shepherd the peoples of Middle-earth through their peril. In the hour of growing dread, when shadows stirred in the east and the whispers of the Dark Lord crept through the trees of Greenwood, Saruman arrived like a pillar of hope. He was the first of the Astray to reach the shores of the Grey Havens, tall, commanding, and robed in white. But oh, how swiftly the brightest stars burn when their fire turns inward. His descent was not immediate. It was slow, like wrought beneath polished marble. Though he walked among the wise, though he held the chief seat in the White Council, Saruman's gaze was already drifting, ever eastward, ever downward. For in his heart, the light that once guided others began to hunger for dominion, power, recognition. And so the White Wizard, once the symbol of resistance against Sauron, began to echo the very tyrant he was sent to oppose. His fall was not a tragic accident. It was a steady choice. 1,000 quiet compromises that paved the way to corruption. He did not leap into darkness. He walked there, head held high, convinced of his own righteousness. This is not just the tale of a hero undone. It is the warning of a soul that believed itself incorruptible. Saruman's fall is the sorrowful reminder that even the brightest lights can cast the longest shadows, and that sometimes the greatest threat does not come from without, but from within. It began with a gift not given, a silent moment, a choice made in the stillness of the Grey Havens. Saruman, first to arrive, leader of the Astray, robed in shining white, stood ready to receive his due. All eyes were upon him, and yet the gift of fire, the elven ring Narya, was not placed in his hand. It passed him by, like a whisper on the wind, and came to rest with another, the gray-cloaked, humble Olorin, known to mortals as Gandalf. In that instant, something shifted, not outwardly. Saruman's face did not flinch. His voice remained calm, but within, envy stirred, a cold, quiet seed that found soil in the pride he had not yet admitted he possessed. That seed, left untended, might have withered, but instead it was fed by every act of deference shown to Gandalf, by every word of praise the elves whispered behind closed doors. Why him? Saruman wondered. Why not me? I came first. I'm the wisest. I should lead. I should rule. And from that whisper of resentment bloomed a storm of ambition. Saruman, who once walked in light, began to seek his own greatness, not as a servant of the Vala, but as a master of fate. He did not see Gandalf as a brother in arms, but as a rival in disguise. The ring denied him became a symbol, a wound, a thorn buried deep in prideful flesh. And so, like a tree twisted by unseen winds, Saruman's path began to bend. The mighty wizard who could have been Middle-earth's shield turned instead toward conquest, not for the enemy's glory, but his own. For it was never Sauron who broke him. It was Saruman himself, undone by a choice, a ring, and the terrible weight of being second. At first, it was curiosity, a scholar's pursuit. Saruman, cloaked in authority and pride, turned his gaze toward the shadows, not to embrace them, but to understand them. For how better to defeat evil than to study its design? So he said, so he believed. He pored over ancient texts, unearthed forgotten lore, and traced Sauron's footsteps through the wreckage of ruined kingdoms. He whispered the names of vanished kings, recited incantations once meant for domination. But somewhere in those long hours of isolation, knowledge soured into something darker. The line between wisdom and obsession is paper-thin, and Saruman crossed it without noticing. He no longer studied Sauron to destroy him. He admired him, not for his cruelty, but for his order, his control, his power. Why, Saruman asked himself, should only one will rule? Why not mine? And slowly, almost imperceptibly, his thoughts began to mirror those of the very enemy he once vowed to oppose. He saw chaos in the world and longed to bend it into structure. He no longer craved peace. He craved obedience. He no longer sought to guide. He sought to command. In Sauron's dominion, Saruman saw a blueprint, not a warning. And so, the White Wizard became a pale echo of the Dark Lord. But imitation breeds blindness. As Saruman mimicked Sauron, he missed the truth, that what he thought was mastery was merely enslavement with a different face. His fall wasn't a collapse, it was a careful transformation. And perhaps the most haunting part of all, he believed he was doing what was necessary. He believed he was the answer. But in chasing the enemy's methods, Saruman became something worse than a servant of evil. He became its reflection. When Saruman claimed Isengard, it was not just a seat of power he sought. It was a throne for his pride, a sanctuary where no voices could challenge him. Nestled at the feet of the Misty Mountains, the ancient tower of Orthanc stood tall, black and gleaming, as if it had been carved from the night itself. To others, it was a fortress. To Saruman, it was a mirror, cold, unyielding, and sharp. Here, behind walls no army could breach, he wove a new identity. No longer simply the White Wizard. He was becoming something more. Something else. The Palantir he found buried within the tower became his gateway to knowledge and his tether to doom. At first, he used it in secret, peering into distant lands, watching the movements of kings and the stirrings of evil. But with each gaze, the eye of Sauron gazed back. What began as control slipped slowly into compulsion. The more Saruman saw, the more he needed to see, and the more he tried to master the stone, the more it mastered him. In the silence of Orthanc, Saruman convinced himself he was building a better world. But Isengard, for all its iron and stone, was no beacon. It was a cage. A beautiful, echoing prison where his thoughts could circle endlessly without contradiction. And the longer he remained inside it, the less he remembered the mission he was sent for. He did not hear the cries of the free peoples. He did not see the growing shadow of his own reflection. He saw only what he wanted to see, a world bent to his will. And so Isengard became a monument not to wisdom, but to a man who once sought peace and instead built himself a throne of ruin. To the outside world, the White Council stood as a bulwark of wisdom, guardians of balance in a realm teetering toward chaos. But within that circle of sages, a quiet war was waged. Saruman, seated as its head, wore his white robes like armor, his voice honeyed with reason, his words cloaked in logic. Yet beneath that polished exterior, envy churned like a hidden fire. Every time Galadriel's eyes rested with quiet trust on Gandalf, every time Elrond deferred to the Grey Pilgrim's judgment, Saruman's pride flinched. He should have been the guiding light. Instead, he watched the council's favor tilt toward a wizard cloaked in humility. So, Saruman adapted, not by rising above, but by weaving lies beneath. When Gandalf urged the council to strike Dol Guldur, Saruman counseled patience, urging caution, masking his manipulation behind strategic delay. But it was never caution. It was calculation. He knew Sauron was stirring. He knew the ring might soon reveal itself. And he wanted time to find it before anyone else. Saruman didn't just oppose the council's plans. He corrupted them, while others fought to unite. He played the game of deception, whispering comfort while plotting conquest. This was no longer a council of the wise. It was a chamber of shadows. And Saruman, once its guiding voice, had become its deceiver-in-chief. The others didn't see it, couldn't see it. Not yet. But Gandalf sensed the rot. He felt the shift in the room, the subtle cracks in trust. For even among the wise, darkness can dwell in silence. And the council, meant to shine as a beacon, had unknowingly lit a candle in a room already burning. A house divided, with its greatest traitor seated at the head. When Saruman turned from counsel to conquest, his mind did not settle for armies of men. No, he wanted something stronger, something born of shadow and blood. Beneath the roots of Orthanc, far from the eyes of elves and men, the White Wizard became a butcher and a blacksmith of flesh. He crafted a new horror to march under his banner, the Uruk-hai. Unlike the twisted, shrieking goblins of the mountains, These creatures were something else entirely. Taller, broader, cunning. Orcs bred with men. Half-breeds of pain and obedience. Monsters molded in pits of filth and fire. They did not fear the sun. They did not feel remorse. They bore the white hand of Isengard on their armor and the stench of ruin on their breath. And Saruman? He called them his warriors, his creation, his children. But children born of cruelty are loyal only to fear. He fed them the flesh of men, living proof that he had severed every tie to the light. What began as whispers of control had become a symphony of savagery. Villages fell like kindling before these beasts. Forests were razed. Rivers ran dark. The Rittermark wept. Eomer, rider of Rohan, would speak of the terror, the unnatural strength, the howling discipline, the force that came not from wild hatred, but from brutal design. And all the while, Saruman sat in his black tower, gazing into the Palantir, dreaming of a world rebuilt in his image. The White Wizard, once sent to protect the innocent, had become a tyrant of flesh and fear. His soldiers were not just weapons. They were proof that the light he once carried had been buried beneath layers of ash, blood, and unholy ambition. And Middle-earth, still unaware, stood on the edge of a nightmare they could not yet name. He stood atop the tower of Orthanc, no longer Saruman the White, but something far stranger, clad now in robes of many colors, each shimmering thread a symbol of pride, complexity, and broken purpose. He declared himself Saruman of many colors. The title was not a boast. It was a warning. The man who once embodied purity had shattered his own light into a prism of deceit. Upon his finger glinted a ring, not one of the great rings forged in secret, but one of his own making. A mimic, a monument, an echo of the power he so desperately craved. "I am Saruman the Wise," he told Gandalf. "Saruman Ringmaker." And with those words, the final veil was lifted. He had not merely fallen. He had recast himself. No longer a servant of the Vala. No longer a guardian of Middle-earth. Now a pretender god. In forging that ring, he attempted more than magic. He attempted divinity. He believed, foolishly, that he could rival the Dark Lord by imitating him. That by building a tower, commanding an army, donning a ring, he could ascend beyond his design. But imitation is not mastery. His ring did not elevate. It corrupted. It sharpened his envy, deepened his delusions, and hollowed his heart. And in seeking to become a master of dominion, he became its slave. Worse still, he believed it was wisdom. He believed it was vision. But in truth, it was madness dressed in silk. And when Gandalf looked in his eyes that day, he did not see a rival. He saw a ghost of what might have been. For Saruman, the final transformation was complete. No longer a man sent to save the world. He had become a parody of its greatest evil, a shadow cast by his own ambition. By the time Gandalf escaped the pinnacle of Orthanc, carried skyward by the wings of Gwaihir, the last glimmer of redemption flickered and died in Saruman's heart. He had crossed a threshold not marked by blood, but by intention. It was not the Palantir that broke him, not Sauron's whispers. It was the slow corrosion of pride, the hunger to matter more than any other. When the White Wizard stood on the precipice, he didn't fall, he stepped forward, deliberately, eagerly, for in his twisted logic, there was no way back, only conquest or annihilation. And so he chose conquest. The forges of Isengard thundered without pause. The trees fell like screams swallowed by wind. Rohan trembled beneath the weight of marching Uruk-hai. Saruman painted his loyalty to Sauron in fire and bone, hoping the Dark Lord would see him as an equal, not knowing that shadows do not share thrones. Isengard became a dark mirror of Mordor, a poor man's fortress cast in stolen ideas and borrowed terror. And Saruman, once the voice of reason among the wise, now barked orders to beasts. He who was sent to heal had become a scourge. Yet even in his madness, he believed he was right, that the world needed control, that he was the one to bring it. But the world does not bend for tyrants. It breaks them. Saruman's ruin was not written in fate. It was written in his choices. 1,000 decisions made in secret. 1,000 betrayals whispered in his heart. His fall was long, but was never inevitable. And in the end, what remained was not a villain to be feared, but a cautionary tale to be remembered. A warning that even the wisest may be undone, not by enemies, but by themselves. Saruman's story is not merely one of power lost. It is a cautionary epic of pride, envy, and self-deception. From a being of celestial light to a tyrant of shadow, his descent was not sudden but slow. 1,000 small choices paving the road to ruin. Each stage, envy of Gandalf, imitation of Sauron, the forging of his own ring, the breeding of monsters, was a step deeper into a darkness of his own making. He wasn't seduced by evil. He believed he was mastering it. And that, perhaps, is the true tragedy, that Saruman's greatest enemy was never Sauron. It was himself.